All right, Tian.
Better?
Do this. I'm excited to talk to you, man.
Me too.
All right, you ready?
I'm ready. I hear
All
great
right.
things about your podcast.
Awesome. I appreciate that. All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am super excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Tian Dayton. Tian, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Guy. I'm glad to be here.
So Dr. Dayton is a board-certified trainer in psychodrama, sociometry, group psychotherapy, and she's a director of the New York Psychodrama Training Institute, as well as a nationally renowned speaker, expert, and consultant in psychodrama, trauma, and addiction. Dr. Dayton is the author of 15 books, including her most recent, The Soulful Journey of Recovery, Emotional Sobriety, Trauma and Addiction, Forgiving and Moving On, and The Living Stage. She has developed an approach for incorporating experiential work into treatment programs and group work, Relationship Trauma Repair RTR. Tian, welcome. Share with the listeners where you're from and where you're calling from, and then let's dive in.
I'm in New York City. I'm from the Midwest. I grew up in Minneapolis, but I've lived my adult life here, raised my children here.
Okay. So 15 books.
15
Crazy.
bucks?
15 books.
Oh, 15 books. Well, they cost about 15 bucks. That's what I thought you were saying. I love to write, and I grew up, I was an ACoA in a family, the youngest child. And if you're the youngest, you don't get to say much because you're always just your language is a little behind, or the older ones want to talk more. So I think I learned to write at a very young age to have someone listen to my thoughts. And I also had very a father who really made me feel like I could interest him.
So let's dive in here. Reading through your bio, which is crazy and amazing at the same time, 15 books. How did you get into this field, interested in trauma? What drew you?
What drew me is that I grew up with my father's alcoholism. It changed everything. Our family blew up. We didn't sort of divorce, we blew up. And what I now would call relational trauma today stayed with me until my adulthood. And it started showing up when I got married and when I had children. And I had, an old friend of the family had given me a copy of Vern Johnson's book, I'll Quit Tomorrow. And, when I realized that I had left my father's alcoholism and married my husband, and his mother was alcoholic, neither of us drank. But one time we were having a fight, and I remember looking at him and saying, we are acting just like our families when they were drunk.
No.
Why are we doing this? We're sober as can be. And that interested me first in recovery. There wasn't an ACoA movement, no codependency, nothing. But I recognized something was wrong with me. We thought when I was young, if you got the alcoholic sober, the family would get better automatically. But we didn't. And over time, entering the field, I entered it before trauma became even a word. So I was doing recovery for what I thought was something that had happened to me. I mean, I just knew I needed the 12 steps, and I knew I needed help. And then like many therapists, I realized I needed so much help that I wanted to be there 40 hours a week. So I became a therapist because I was obviously codependent, but didn't know it. And when the trauma literature came in, everything sort of fell into place. And I understood that I had PTSD, that the problems that I had gone through in my childhood were resurfacing in adulthood, that in the same way that a car backfiring will make a soldier think that gunfire is happening again, for people like me, ACoAs, kids with relational trauma,
and just let me just interrupt you. Remind our listeners what ACoA is.
Adult children of alcoholics, of addicts. So for us, relationships are the trigger. Intimacy is the trigger. Family.
So this started to kind of manifest, you said, when you started to get into relationships and when you were married.
Married with
Okay.
probably one child at that time.
Okay. So well into your adulthood.
That's the nature of PTSD. When it's not challenged, it can be dormant. And what challenges it is different for most people. However, it's usually a relationship that will really trigger you and get you into therapy, you know, mid
Now,
30s.
Tian, I mean, you talked about, how this impacted you to a certain degree and the steps you took, but what was it that took you from wanting to seek help to saying, I want to help others. I need to help others.
Codependency. It was my own need to be. I was standing in my living room. I was probably 32 years old, looking out at the park and thinking, I have everything I want. I'm married to the man I love. I have by now 2 beautiful kids I love. I have everything I could want. I know I am happy in my head, but I can't feel it. I couldn't feel the
Mm,
goodness of my own life. And I knew enough to know that wasn't good.
right.
So I sought out a program that was given by a woman called Sharon Wakescheider Cruz, who wrote Another Chance in Choice Making. And I went to a 5-day program with Sharon, and I now design those programs. I have done that. I'm a senior fellow at the Meadows, and I design those. I've designed them all around the place, but and the country, I mean. But that program changed my life. I went to it. I encountered psychodrama. It felt so good and so relieving to get this stuff up and out that I thought I'm changing. I was in the middle of a master's, and I thought I'm redoing my master's. I'm becoming a therapist. I've got to be around this all the time.
So what was it, Tian, that did it for you in that 5-day?
It was the psychodrama. It was having somebody look at me and and realize, give me a way out. That's what it was. I had done therapy, so I got it. I got that my past impacted my present. I got that my family was in need of help, but the psychodrama brought it out of my body. You can yell in psychodrama, you can beat a pillow in psychodrama, you can but the most important thing is you can enroll somebody in your family system. So who could play your father? What do you want to say to him? It's not what do you
Right.
want to say about him. What do you want to say to him? And
Yeah.
what do you want to say to your mother and your sisters and your brother, to the whole system? And what do you want to say to the bottle of scotch? What do you want to, then you
Wow.
reverse roles and talk back to yourself. As
Uh-huh.
so it's relational at its very core. It's attachment therapy at its very core, because you experience both sides of the attachment. And it's trauma therapy at its very core, because you are bringing the thinking mind back on board and processing the limbic material that went underground and that has stayed underground and will stay underground if all you do is talk about it.
Hmm.
Make
So you walk out of there on fire. I mean, I can
on
feel it
fire,
now.
on fire,
You're right. So
dance
what?
out
So
of there.
so what happens next?
I changed my master's from, or did I enter my PhD program? Everything happened there. I guess I finished my master's in educational psychology, and then uh, eventually got into a PhD program for clinical psychology. I found a person who did psychodrama within the next year, because truthfully, I didn't even know we were doing psychodrama. We called it experiential therapy. It was my husband who said,
Ah.
some random flyer came to me that said psychodrama. And he said, that's the psychodrama. That's what you love, psycho and drama. Go and check this out. And I did. I found a trainer. I spent the next 8 years becoming fully trained as a psychodramatist, getting my PhD. Um, there we go. That was it.
And that
My
was
life
it.
changed completely.
Wow. Wow.
And embracing recovery and heading for 12-step Al-Anon. Yeah, and ACoA meetings.
All right. So, first of all, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that is amazing. And for those of you who are listening to this, I would encourage you to watch the video, because we're doing a video here. Because when you were describing what that was like for you, I could see it in your face. Seriously, you were like lighting up. It was clear how it impacted you.
You
So
know, I'm
your
so
most,
grateful.
go ahead.
I'm just so grateful, that I got to this soon enough in my life to change everything, to change it for the legacy for me, for my children, and now for my grandchildren. Because it's nothing less than that. It changes everything to embrace recovery. And psychodrama is the thing that really heals you.
For those, I mean, we've talked a lot about psychodrama on this podcast, but for those who are listening who are maybe not too familiar with it, what, why, and I love that sound that I hear in the background there I'm from New York, and
Drama,
I
right?
love it. Yeah. Um, I mean, talk a little more about the power of psychodrama.
Well, it is fundamentally an interpersonal neurobiological experience. It embodies role. As I said, you can choose people to play the characters of your life. If you have been traumatized, what happens in the moments of terror, your thinking mind shuts down, but your limbic world revs up. So your fight flight is going. Your limbic system processes emotions, it processes sensorial data. So the sights, the sounds, all the external information of the situation you're in sinks into your limbic system. If you are in a normal state of mind, you're aware of that, right? You're thinking about that. If you're terrified, your mind is gone. It's shut down because nature does not want you thinking, should I run out of the, charging elephant's way? You're geared to have this part shut down and your limbic system take you straight out. That's what happens to children in these kinds of trauma engendering homes. They are yelled at by a parent, right? They are itty bitty. I have grandchildren and they are defenseless little creatures. If a parent chooses to abuse them, they are defenseless. Their only defense is to shut down, to stop the pain from not overwhelming them, from annihilating them. So children in these abusive homes go into an altered state, and they are not there. They are physically there, but psychically they are dissociated, they are shut down. And in order to and that's the attachment, right? That's part of the attachment, that kind of shutdown. So that's why it surfaces later on when you want to form an intimate relationship. If you have these big shutdown parts, when you try to work things out, every relationship has to work a zillion things out. But if you can't access the feelings, if you just shut down or withdraw or get enraged, because that would be the other side of that coin. If you can't be left alone to shut down, you might pop into rage. So then you think you're in the wrong relationship, right? No, you just need help. You just need help. So that's psychodrama allows that moment of intense relating to be recreated on the safe stage. Who could play your father? Who could play you as a child? How did that interaction go? What do you want to say to him that you couldn't say then? So then your mind wakes up. And suddenly you get to know where this all set in. And you find the words, you find the anger, you find the justified rage, you find the pain, you find the tears, you wake up emotionally. And as you do this, your thinking mind is starting to make new sense of it, because you are, after all, an adult. You're not a 3-year-old. You're seeing it and you're thinking, oh, that's what happened. Well, it wasn't maybe my fault. Maybe I'm not bad. Maybe I'm not dumb. And then the therapist will call out reverse roles when it's appropriate. suddenly your father talking back to you or your mother talking back to you. And when you inhabit that role, a curious thing happens. You come to understand that that person is not you. You take them
Hmm.
out of the insides where they're living and you put them outside where they belong. And as you play that person, you develop a consciousness of that person that you don't have when they just live kicking and screaming inside of you or like this inside of you. So that internalized object, we call it, is now outside, externalized. You're concretized. And that method of concretizing helps people who are depressed, for example, to take the part of them that's inside beating themselves up and put it outside. Talk to it, reverse roles, become it. Talk back to yourself as it. And that interaction, the back and forth over time, loosens up the grip it has on you. And it also brings awareness so your thinking can start to put things into a context.
Is it a process that requires multiple sessions or sessions over a period of time?
Yes.
Yeah,
However, that said, one can do remarkable healing.
right.
It's amazing. I mean, one is very, very effective, but ideally, people spend years in a recovery process. It takes
Okay.
time.
So that kind of brings us to your book here, your most recent book, The Soulful Journey of Recovery, A Guide to Healing from a Traumatic Past for ACAs, Codependents, or those with adverse childhood experiences.
Mhm.
Um, why did you write this book?
Well, I like to write. I love to have a writing project. So that's one of the reasons. And well, the other one really is I said this on another podcast recently. I had a roommate in college, and when she was a little girl, she she had so much trouble learning how to pull her socks up. You know how little kids are, you know,
Yeah, I have a
that it sits so
4-year-old.
hard. And she finally figured out how to pull her knee socks up. And she wanted to write a book so other children didn't have to struggle as much. And I always remember that story because it's sort of like why I want to write. I know the way I can shortcut this for people like crazy. I can shortcut it. You know, I can say, pick up this book and read it, and you will know what it took me 25 years to figure out. Now, information's all over the place, but one of my specialties is to boil it down and make it easy and accessible. And then I put exercises after each chapter. So not only are you boiling the information down, but then you're making it personal. So after every
Right.
chapter, you get to personalize it for you. And then on my website, my tiandayton.com website, I have guided imageries. And all this is just free. Guided imageries to go with the chapters or help in the process. Other people's lectures that seem good, psychodramas that I've done. So I'm trying to make this as interactional as possible. And if you do this in conjunction with 12-step or with therapy or even start your own support group, change will come. You don't have to
So you
spend a bunch of money.
so you said you could shortcut this process. Um, Talk a little bit about that. I mean, again, people who are listening to this are therapists. People who are listening to this might know of someone that this book would be good for. What in this book is going to help shortcut this process in a sense?
Would somewhere along the line, you have to wrap your mind around the dynamics of what happened to you. You have to understand that you have been changed by adverse childhood experiences. And you have to understand how that change happened in your psyche, in your mind and body, and why adverse childhood experiences. The real study was why do people who have had adverse childhood experiences wind up in the doctor's office? So if you hurt your mind, you hurt your body. It's not just your mind and your heart that get hurt, it's your body, your mind and your
Mm-hmm.
heart. So that takes an understanding of some of the dynamics of trauma. And as I say, boil that down to make it simple. What happened to you? Why is grief useful? Why do you need to grieve to get out of that? Why might psychodrama be a great form of grieving? Um, do you need to process anger? Yes.
Hmm.
How do you process anger? Do you need to forgive? I mean, in my mind, forgiveness, not because it's some concept that is a good person does, but because there's an acceptance and an integration and a willingness to re-embrace life that happens, because there's a taking. First of all, if you forgive, I mean, maybe we take the word forgive out and call it accept, but if the way I see it is forgiveness, the first thing it does, it acknowledges that something happened. A lot of people are traumatized and they want to talk themselves out. It wasn't that bad, or it didn't really happen, or they were just doing their best. We give ourselves a zillion reasons. Doesn't matter. If it hurt you and it left you compromised, you have to do something about that. So
Mm.
you have to acknowledge that something happened and then be willing to work on it, take responsibility for what happened inside of you. And then realize, what does it matter who's to blame? I need to get over it.
Right.
What does it matter who I get back at? I'm going to get back at myself ultimately if I don't heal this, and I'm going to get back at my children because I'll pass on the pain. And these are, you don't want to get back at yourself or your kids.
Right. Just want to remind everyone that I'm speaking with Dr. Tian Dayton. Tian, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
My website, tiandayton.com, contact.
Okay,
Yeah,
and we'll have that linked up at the show notes page. The Soulful Journey of Recovery. Why soulful?
because good question. It's a spiritual. Ultimately, it connects you with, I think, the feeling that there is more to life, that we have an inner being. It's not just our body that gets hurt or our mind. It's something deep inside. And as a grandmother, I'm very aware of inner beings in the process of formation. These little grandchildren I have are, they're like vibrating little light bulbs. They're just, they're so alive and they're so intact, and they have an inner being that is hugely beyond their tiny little bodies. They have an inner being that is larger than the inner being of many, many adults whose inner being has gotten squished, turned off. But that it's a soulful journey because you're keeping that part of you alive. And in my belief system, there is a oneness to everything, that if and that every religion is heading in the same direction. I see no need for different religions. I don't understand them even. I think anybody's at an experience of what people call God, but really source energy, um, understands that that has to be the same for everybody. There aren't like a bunch of different gods, a bunch of different source energies. There's one.
You've been obviously doing this a long time. You know what I'm hearing in your voice, in your words, is hope, and a
Oh,
kind of a
yes,
reinstallation of hope.
yes,
Also,
yes.
can you share one of your earliest kind of mistakes, or whatever you want to call it, errors that you made clinically, and how that impacted you, what you learned from that?
Yeah, lots of them. Why I do something called frozen moments in my trauma processes, and I incorporated trauma into psychodrama as the research emerged. Right, slowly it emerged. Well, like actually not so slowly, um, but I learned it slowly and thoughtfully and carefully. Now I was speaking a lot, and on the circuit, on the talking circuit, and I'd even written a book called Trauma and Addiction. Maybe I wrote a lot about trauma, but in my mind, I was just like learning. It was just, nobody could be an expert on something that was just coming out, right? In my mind, you
Mm-hmm.
take, nobody's an expert in anything, but um, I noticed that people would come up and shut down as I was doing psychodrama in front of, big audiences. And that had never happened for me. I could always move people through dramas pretty easily. And about a year into it, I thought, what am I doing wrong? Why is this going on? Eventually it would work, but it just was too much work on my part. So I realized that the mistake I was making was that I wasn't seeing me how other people saw me. People were seeing me as having an expertise in trauma. They were bringing their trauma dramas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with getting the word labeling trauma is you add another hill to climb. Oh, now I have to get over my trauma. What's trauma work? How do I get over that? How do I be a good trauma client? How do I be a good trauma therapist?
Mm-hmm.
Trauma is just life. We've now named it and we understand it, but that shouldn't keep us from understanding it's just very natural to be traumatized, and it's very natural to heal from trauma.
So I just want to make sure I get this. You were presenting yourself in a way that was becoming an obstruction for people to.
Well, I think people just wanted me to heal their big traumas. They would come up and bring their biggest trauma on stage at a conference. But also they had an idea about what trauma was that blocked them. The very notion of trauma made them scared all over again. So there was a frozenness that I had to pay attention to that didn't exist before the word trauma became so big.
Okay.
In both the therapist, me, and the client.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not explaining it that well, really. The mistake was that I didn't see how people were seeing me. They were seeing me as a trauma expert and they wanted me to heal them in 45 minutes. And so I devised this process of come up and bring a frozen moment. And that got them to own their own frozenness. And then the work happened again. Once people came up and went, okay, here's where I froze, then the next implication was, I'm going to come up here to unfreeze. But if they didn't own it and just kind of brought it up, to see what they could do with it, they weren't owning it. And then they would be in the stage talking to everybody and they'd freeze all over again. Mm-hmm. Because that's what they did as children.
All right. So once again, the Soulful Journey of Recovery, a guide to healing from a traumatic past for ACAs, codependents, or those with adverse childhood experiences. We'll have that linked up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Tian, your website is tiandayton.com. Mm-hmm. Okay. We'll have everything linked up there. What's next for you? What's going on for you right now?
Well, I'm developing a lot of programs, mostly at the Meadows, where, as I say, I'm a senior fellow. So the idea of the senior fellows is that they're training all the therapists in their various disciplines that they have developed, and the discipline I've developed is sociometrics. They're psychodramatic processes that are discrete. You don't have to be fully trained in psychodrama. So they're psychoeducational. Mm-hmm. So I've developed programs, 5-day programs that you can go to and I train staff to run them. And that's a good thing because that's a legacy thing. I can incorporate the work and not do it myself. And I want to do something for kids too. I want to do some creative things that'll help kids with their own emotional regulation, and that'll teach them emotional literacy at a young age. So these kinds of, I always like some fun project. I like
awesome. Exciting. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It was a pleasure. It's great to meet you.
Lovely to meet you. Thank you. It's a lovely podcast.
All right. Take care.
You too. Bye.